All right, so for the quiz, we have 2.4 and 2.6. 2.6 was transformation, so it's a lot of memorization. So let's look at 1 and 2 and describe our transformations. If we are multiplying by a negative on the outside, what does that do to our graph? Reflection on the x. What about multiplying by 2 on the outside? Vertical or horizontal? Vertical stretch by a factor of 2. What about if we add 8 on the inside? Left 8, perfect. And subtracting 6 on the outside? Down 6. Notice how the exponent doesn't mean anything. That's just the parent function of our graph. That's the shape. So that's the only number here that we don't have a transformation for. It's just an x to the third power graph. Questions here? Let's do the same thing with number 2. The exponent doesn't mean anything. So it could either be like an x squared graph, an x cubed, an absolute value one like this, or a square root. That's just kind of like what tells you what's inside and what's outside. So if we are multiplying by 2/3 on the outside, what does that do to our graph? Vertical shrink. Don't forget to list if it's a vertical or horizontal stretch or shrink. So it's a vertical shrink by a factor of what? By a factor of 2/3.
How do you know if it's horizontal?
Inside is horizontal.
Oh, that's right.
So if we multiply inside by a negative, what does that do?
Reflection on the y.
Reflection on the y. What about multiplying the inside by 4? Horizontal shrink by 1/4. Awesome. So remember, if it's horizontal, it's always the opposite of what you think. So if it's a number bigger than 1, it's going to be a shrink. And you always take the reciprocal of it. So horizontal, you take the reciprocal. What about if we subtract 1 on the inside? Right 1. And add 5 on the outside? Up 5. So let's look at the next part. I'm going to go to number 4. So 4 says the parent function is the square root of x. It's reflected over the x-axis, horizontally stretched by a factor of 7, and shifted 2 units to the left and 8 units up. So let's do one thing at a time. Reflected over the x-axis, a negative on the outside. So I'll just say negative outside. So we can do that first. I'll do one thing at a time. So I have the negative square root of x. That negative is on the outside since it's the x-axis. Horizontally stretched by a factor of 7. 1/7 gets multiplied to x on the inside or the outside? Inside. Horizontally is inside. So inside times 1/7. Because remember, when it's horizontally, you have to take the reciprocal. I'll write that in here. 1/7 times x. Shifted 2 units to the left, what would we do? Plus 2 on the inside or outside? Inside. And 8 units up. Plus 8 on the outside. So let's apply both of those. So I have negative square root of 1/7 times x plus 2 on the inside and plus 8 on the outside.
Why'd you put the 1/7 in front of the x? So after?
Because we're multiplying the x by 1/7 on the inside, and it's 1/7 because we have to take the reciprocal of the factor of 7. Since it's being stretched by a factor of 7 horizontally, we do the reciprocal. So that would be our answer. Any questions? All right, next let's look at 5 and 6. We want to find the average rate of change. Notice how 5 and 6 are written a little bit differently. It's asking for the same thing. When 5 says between -2 and 3, these are talking about both the x's. So it'd be like between x is equal to -2 and x is equal to -3. So it's just written a little bit differently than number 6, but it's asking for the same thing. These are both your x's. So let's do 5. We can practice with our fractions. So to find the average rate of change, we use the slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I need to find the y's for both of my x's. So first, we want to find the y for when x is -2. How would I find the y? Awesome. Plug in -2 into the x's. So I have 2 times -2 squared minus 3/4 times -2. Just make sure you follow your order of operations. -2 squared would be +4, and +4 times 2 is 8. Then here I have -3/4 times -2. That would become a positive 6 over 4. And what is 6 over 4 simplified to? 3 over 2. So I have 8 plus 3 over 2. What do I need if I'm adding fractions? Common denominator. So I'm going to change 8 to be 16 over 2. Then we add them, we get 19 over 2. Perfect. So my y is 19 over 2. What should I do next? Do the same thing. We want to find the y when x is 3. So we're going to plug in 3. So I have 2 times 3 squared minus 3/4 times 3. 3 squared is 9. 9 times 2 is 18. 3/4 times 3 would be 9 over 4. What do I need if I'm adding or subtracting fractions? Common denominator. So I need to change 18 to have a denominator of 4. So I'm going to multiply 18 times 4. What's 18 times 4? 72. Perfect. 72 minus 9. So 63 over 4. What do we do next? We want to plug it into our slope formula. So I'm going to label it as x2, x1, y1, x2, y2. Keep it in the order that it gives it to you. It's asking you from between -2 to 3, so just make sure that -2 is your x's, the 3, your x1s, the 3 is going to be your x2. So just keep it in the order that it gives you. So let's plug in. We have 63 over 4 minus 19 over 2 over 3 minus -2. How do I add fractions? Common denominator. So I need to change 19 over 2 to have a denominator of 4. So that would make it 38 over 4. 63 minus 38 is 25. Perfect. So 25 over 4 over, what's 3 minus -2? 3 plus 2, which is 5. Oh no, what do we do when we have a fraction and a fraction? Keep, change, flip. Keep the numerator, change to multiplication, and flip the denominator. 5 is 5 over 1, so we're going to flip it to be 1 over 5. Now we multiply straight across. So that would be 25 over 20, which simplifies to 5 over 4. So our rate of change is 5 over 4. Just be super careful with the math with these. Number 6 isn't going to be as challenging because you're not going to end up with fractions, but just take your time with the math. It's super easy, especially with fractions, to make a little mistake. Yes. So let's take a look at number 3. So for number 3, our parent function is x cubed. It's reflected over the y-axis. So if we have a reflection over the y-axis, what does that mean? Negative is on the inside. So right now we have a negative x cubed. If it's vertically compressed by a factor of 1/7, vertical compression happens where? Inside or outside? Outside. So when it's outside, it's exactly how it says. So we're multiplying by 1/7 on the outside. Now, if it's shifted left 3 units, what would we do there? 3. So plus 3 on the inside. So I'm going to add 3 on the inside. And then 4 units down. Compressed and shrink mean the same thing. This would be -4 on the outside. So our function would be this. You're welcome. There were lots of these questions from the web assign, so if you want extra practice with certain questions, just make sure you go back to the web assign and work those out. Yeah, so vertically compressed and shrink mean the same thing, or compressed and shrink. So you might have like a horizontal compression too, which is the same as shrink. Let's look at 7 and 8. So we want to determine if the function's even, odd, or neither. So if our functions are odd, when we plug in the same number and it's opposite, we're going to get opposite answers. If we get opposite answers, that means that it's odd. If we get the same answer, that means that they are even functions. And if they are not opposite answers and not the same answer, then it would be neither. So remember, for these questions, plug in a number and its opposite. So I would always recommend plugging in 2 and -2, just because it's going to be a nice, easy number to plug in. You have to plug a number in that's greater than 1. So you can't plug in 1 and -1. This trick does not work. It will work sometimes, but not all the time. So just to be super sure, it'll work all the time if you plug in a number that's greater than 1. So let's plug in 2 for number 7. So I'm going to say g of 2. 2 cubed minus 2 times 2 squared. 2 cubed is 8. Minus 2 squared would be 4, and 4 times 2 would be 8. 8 minus 8, 0. Let's plug in -2 and see what we get. So you have -2 cubed minus 2 times -2 squared. What's -2 cubed? -8. Then we have -2 squared, which would be +4, and +4 times -2, -8. So -8 minus 8, -16. Are these two numbers the same? Are they opposites? So what would our answer here be? Neither. Let's look at number 8. So we want to plug in 2 and negative 2. So negative 3 plus 2 times 2 to the 4th power. 2 to the 4th power is 16, and 16 times 2, 32. What's negative 3 plus 32? 29. Now let's plug in f of negative 2. So negative 3 plus 2 times negative 2 to the 4th power. Negative 2 to the 4th power is positive 16 times 2 would be 32. And negative 3 plus 32? 29. Are our answers the same? So what does that mean? That this is even. What does it mean to be opposites? Same number but different signs. So one would be negative and one is positive. All right, next, let's do a word problem. So we're going to do 11 and 12. So 11 says a teacher weighed 145 pounds in 1986 and weighed 190 pounds in 2007. What's the rate of change in weight? So we're going to call the first one that it talks about X1 and Y1. The second one is going to be X2 and Y2. It does make a difference because we're talking about, so for the rate of change in weight, we're talking about how many pounds he loses per year. So in our formula, we have y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. On top should be the pounds. So our pounds should be the y. Does that make sense? So just be careful when labeling. If you need to, write your units first to see which number is going to be on top and which one's going to be on the bottom. So since we're talking about pounds per year, pounds needs to be the y because that's on top. So this will be y1 and x1 and y2 and x2. So let's plug it in. We have 190 minus 145 over 2007 minus 1986. 190 minus 145 is 45. 2007 minus 1986, 21. Can I simplify 45 over 21? What goes into both of them? 3. So we divide 45 by 3, we get 15, and 21 divided by 3 is 7. So it'd be 15 over 7 pounds per year. For these questions, I need to see the units in your answer. So you can't just say 15 over 7. You'll lose points if you don't put the pounds per year. I need to know what you're talking about. The next question says, what's the rate of change of the money in his savings account per week? So we're talking about how much money per week.
Is there anything else that's like usually?
So looking at number 12, Michael started a savings account with $300. After 4 weeks, he had $350, and after 9 weeks, he had $400. What is the rate of change in his savings account per week? So let's say this question didn't say anything about after 9 weeks. All right, so we know that our formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So the y's are going to be talking about money, and the x's are going to be the weeks. So Michael started a savings account with $300. So money is going to be the y, So this will be y1. What's our x? What? Careful, is 1 would be saying like after 1 week, he had that much money. But he started the savings account from day 0, he had $300. So what would our x be? 0. So x1 is 0. After 4 weeks, he had $350. So remember, dollars is talking about the y, so this is going to be our y2. What's our x2? 4. So let's plug everything into our formula. So y2 minus y1 would be 350 minus 300 over x2 minus x1 is 4 minus 0. So 350 minus 300 would be 50 over 4 minus 0 is 4. Can I simplify 50 over 4? We can divide them both by 2, so it'd be 25 over 2. So 25 over 2, what? Money per week? Dollars per week. All right, one other question that's not on the review that you're going to see on the quiz is going to be net change. How do we find the net change? Just the change in y. So it's just y2 minus y1. That's it. So it's just the top part of your fraction.